Hello guys, you are welcome to my classroom. Today we shall be discussing public revenue and public expenditure as it relates to Nigeria and contained in the second and fourth schedule of the 1999 Constitution. Public revenue and expenditure are key policy instruments of the fiscal policy of government, hence useful tools for influencing economic activity of an economy to a desired level. The topic is useful as it provides a background information on the extent of expenditure powers of each tier of government and the various sources of generating revenue to finance government activities at various levels of government. Also, the topic provides a sound background for understanding the fiscal federalism of Nigerian state, which is currently a burning issue in Nigeria. So at the end of this lecture, you should be able to identify the constitutional provisions in terms of expenditure powers of various tiers of government, identify the various sources of revenue available to each tier of government in Nigeria, as well as identify the various tiers of government that have expenditure and revenue power as contained in the Constitution. Once again, you are welcome. Let us start by looking at the concept of revenue. Generally speaking, public revenue refers to the income generated by government from its activities to carry out its duties or responsibilities with the aim of directing the economy towards desired goals or targets. However, in the 1999 Constitution, the Constitution gave a very clear definition to the concept of revenue. According to Section 162, subsection 10 of that Constitution, it says that revenue refers to any income or return accruing to or derived by the government or the federation from any source. Here, the sources this constitution is referring to include any receipt, however described, arising from the operations of any law. 2, any return, however described from or in respect of properties held by the government of the federation. And 3, any returns by way of interest on loans and dividends in respect of shares or interest held by the government of the federation in any company or statutory body. So on the whole, revenue refers to every means, every way that government generates its income to carry out its activities. So now, what are the tiers of government in Nigeria that have revenue powers? We have 3 tiers of government in our fiscal federalism and the Federal Capital Territory. So we have the federal government. This is referred to as the central government headed by the president. It is the national government that oversees the entire country. Then we also have the state government. As we are aware, we have 36 states in Nigeria. Each of them have their revenue power and is headed by the governor. Then we also have the local government councils. And in Nigeria, we have 774 local government councils. And each of these councils is headed by the local government council chairman. And we also have the Federal Capital Territory, FCT, Abuja, which is the seat of power of the federal government. So the Federal Capital Territory is an autonomous unit from any state or local government. Therefore, it has its own revenue power. And the Federal Capital Territory is normally administered by a minister appointed by the president. Now let us move straight to identify the various sources of revenue to these different tiers or levels of government. We will start off from the federal government level. At the federal government level, there are two broad sources of revenue. These are the oil revenue and the non-oil revenue. The federal government is actually the only tier of government that have power over oil revenue in Nigeria. So oil revenue is the main source, the chief source of federal government revenue in Nigeria. And this oil revenue is made up of revenues from issues like joint ventures of government, petroleum profit tax, rent, that is rent in the oil field, NNPC earnings from direct sales of crude oil or refined oil, as the case may be, proceed from domestic markets, that is sales of petroleum product within the Nigeria economy, penalties from gas flaring is paid by the various oil firms, oil companies that are engaged in gas flaring. They normally have some penalties they pay to government for flaring our gas, and this constitutes part of the revenue of the federal government. And lastly, under the oil revenue is the pipeline licenses and other fees. So these are various areas we get our oil revenue from. Then the other source of revenue there is the non-oil revenue. The non-oil revenue is actually made up of tax. We have the direct and indirect tax, but the chief source of revenue is the indirect tax for the federal government. And these indirect tax involve the excise duties. Those are taxes imposed on goods produced domestically. Then we have the custom duties, which are the import and export duties, import and export taxes. Then the federal government share of the value added tax. That is one of the issues that is causing controversy between the states and the federal government, and the matter right now is in court. So these are sources of indirect tax. Then we also have the direct tax, which include the proceeds from the personal income tax of members of the armed forces, the Nigerian police, and other paramilitary organizations, as well as the Ministry of External Affairs. So these are the key sources of revenue to the federal government. So having known the sources of revenue to the federal government, let us now turn our attention to that of the various states in Nigeria. What are their sources of income or revenue in Nigeria? So here again, we have two main sources, which are the external sources and the internal sources, which is normally called the internally generated revenue, IGR. So in the case of the external source, the first, and which is one of the very important source of revenue to most states of the country, is the statutory allocation on the federation account. So most states in Nigeria heavily depend on this statutory allocation, which is a monthly allocation for the federal government, as their main source of revenue. So most states may not have other viable means of raising good revenue, so they depend heavily on this statutory allocation from the federal government. Then we also have aid and grant from federal governments occasionally, and donor agencies, both within and outside the country. These are very little source and not regular source of revenue to the state. Then we also have the internal sources, which is the internally generated revenue. Actually, there are some states like Lagos states, like River states, they have some good sources of internally generated revenue, whereas there are some states that do not have a viable internally generated revenue. However, broadly speaking, the sources of internally generated revenue include sales tax, which is now the VAT, value added tax, which is tax imposed, it's a consumption tax. And also we have the personal income tax, which are tax imposed on the salaries of workers in the state. We have the corporate income tax, which is profit of the companies registered. Then we have the vehicle license fees. As you're aware, for you to use vehicles within the country, within the state, you must register in a particular state. So each state have their licensing office where you can go and register your vehicle. The revenue generated there is a very good source of revenue to the state government. Then we have withholding tax for enterprises. Corporate organizations, they pay their withholding tax to the federal government, but enterprises registered here, they pay the withholding tax is collected by the state government. Then another very good source of revenue to the state government in terms of IGRO is the fees collected from certificates of occupancies of land. In some states, particularly places like come to Edo State here, it's a good source of revenue because people are developing land and you have to pay to have certificate of occupancy from the state government. Then we have income from commercial ventures. These are government ventures. If the venture into businesses, the profit realized from such ventures constitute revenue to the state. And we also have income from government investment. State government can invest into treasury bills, into securities, and other investments within and outside the country. So revenue generated from such investment constitutes part of the generated revenue. So once again, I will say that most states in Nigeria are not viable in terms of IGRO. So they depend heavily on the statutory allocation from the federation account. So that is why you discover that when there is shock in statutory allocation, most states are unable to pay salary. It is because their internally sourced generated revenue are very shallow. Now let us look at the third tier of government, which is the local government. What are their major sources of revenue in Nigeria? From the constitution, we have two sources of revenue. These are the external sources and the internal sources, which is normally referred to as the IGRO. Then the external sources include one, statutory allocation from the federation account. This is the monthly allocation. This is actually one of the most important and viable source of revenue to the local government. In short, some local government depend heavily or solely on this statutory allocation from the federation account because they may not have any other source of meaningful income in their internally generated revenue. So they depend. So this is a chief source of revenue to most of the local governments in Nigeria. Then we have second one, the grant from the IGRO of the state government. The state government is supposed to pay some percentage of the internally generated revenue and distribute among the local government in the state. I use the word suppose because I don't think I've heard that such revenue actually went to the local government. Then thirdly, we have aid and grant from donor agencies, both within and outside the country. Again, this is not a major or regular source of income. It just come once in a while and for specific purpose. Then we have the internal sources, which is the IGRO, which include tenement rates, which are rates paid for land occupied by companies operating within a local government. This is a good source of revenue for local government that have a lot of corporate enterprises, corporate entity in their domain. So they get a lot of revenue from this source. They will have income from commercial ventures. When local government engage in commercial activities, carry consultancies, render services to general public, some money are collected. This one part of revenue to them. Then we have income from investment. When local government invests in security in businesses, they also get returns and it constitutes part of their internally generated revenue. Then we have share of value added tax. Then we have taxation on local people. When we say local people, we're talking about those people that are not civil servants that reside in the state, such as farmers, traders, they pay their tax to the local government. Then we have fees for license, such as bicycle, wheelbarrow, pets, television, radio. These are all identified area in the Constitution where local government can impose a license and they obtain revenue. Then we have outdoor advertisement. This is another good source of revenue to the local government. Those billboards, the revenue is collected by the local government. And also this mobile advert, inscription of vehicles or name of companies, normally taxed by the local government. Then we have charges that are collected by the local government, such as motor park fees, market storage fees, slaughterhouses, rural land registration, marriage registration, death registration, cemetery charges. All these are charges collected by the local government, and upon that, they get a revenue. Then we also have street naming or road naming. It is the responsibility of the local government to name streets and roads, and those such streets pay to the local government for such names, constitute part of their revenue. Then we have liquor license. Local government actually is empowered by the Constitution to collect liquor license. And lastly, here is the cattle tax, which is the Django. This may be very popular in the northern region of the country, where each of the cattle owners, they pay specific amount of tax, Django, to the local government. Now, the sources of revenue to the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Again, like we identify in others, here we also have external sources and internal sources. The external sources, of course, include the statutory allocation from the Federation account. Again, this is a major source of revenue to the FCT. I also have aid and grant from federal government and other donor agencies. Then we also have the intelligent revenue, the internal sources, the IGRO. The FCT are also empowered to collect revenue to constitute their internally generated revenue. Some of them include the personal income tax, which are taxes collected by workers. We have withholding tax, various categories and various types. Then we have the capital gain tax. These are indirect taxes. The stamp duties on instruments executed by individuals, pool betting, lottery, casinos, gambling, anyway, they are licensed and they pay to the FCT authorities for operating within the Federal Capital Territory. They will have business registration, premises registration, actually business premises within the Federal Capital Territory. The FCT authority have the right, they have the power to collect such registration duties of such business. Then we have the developmental levy levied upon the development of properties within the FCT. Then you have the street naming. It is the Federal Capital Territory Authority that actually collects money from street naming, just like the local government do in other parts of the country. The right of occupancy for land properties collected by the Federal Capital Authority. We also have the property tax, as well as the entertainment fees and event center taxes for events, entertainments, event centers. They normally pay such fees to the Federal Capital Territory Authority if they are operating within the Federal Capital Territory. Then we have the market fees, market located within the Federal Capital Territory. The fees are collected by the Federal Capital Territory authorities as part of their internally generated revenue. So these are sources of revenue to the FCT. So now let us pause for a while to carry out this self-assessment exercise. We have two questions here. Define the term public revenue as contained in the 1999 Constitution of Nigeria. Then two, say identify the sources of revenue to the various tiers of government in Nigeria. Having discussed the various aspects of revenue, sources of government, let us now turn our attention to public expenditure. Like we normally do, we can simply define the concept and look at the various classification. The public expenditure is easily defined as all expenses incurred by government to maintain itself and the society. So any income spent, any money spent by the government is known as public expenditure. And they are classified in various ways. It could be recurrent or capital expenditure. It could be classified as productive or non-productive expenditure. It could be classified as government final consumption and government investment. So when we say recurrent expenditure, these are expenditure incurred by government on continuous basis for the purchase of goods and services and maintaining government. It involves payment or expenses incurred for payment of salaries and wages, employers' contributions, interest, subsidies, and transfer. So the cost of maintaining government, the cost of running administration, the cost of carrying out daily activities is called recurrent expenditure. And they are called recurrent because they keep reoccurring on continuous basis. Every budget they are there. That's why it's called recurrent. Then we also have the capital expenditure, which are payment for acquisition of fixed capital assets, stock, land, intangible assets, such as expenditure on buildings, construction, building of schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and so on. So expenditure incurred by government for capital projects, they are called capital expenditure. Then we can also have productive expenditure and non-productive expenditure. Government expenditure can be productive if such expenditure contributes to the productive base of the economy. If it stimulates economic activity that finally stimulates growth, is known as productive expenditure. Then it is unproductive if such expenditure of government fails to contribute to the productive base of the economy. So in societies where most of their expenditure are productive, you see the economy growing and the economy is healthy. But societies where greater part of their expenditure is unproductive, the country normally faces economic stagnation. Many less developed countries fall victim of this type of public expenditure. Then you can also have government final consumption and government investment. When we talk about government final expenditure, we are talking about government expenditure on the acquisition of goods and services for current use. In other words, when government acquire goods and services for current use to directly satisfy the individual or collective needs and requirements of the community or society, it is classified as government final consumption. On the other hand, when government acquire goods and services for future use, it is classified as government investment. So these are various classifications of public expenditure. So, but the most popular that we can see, even in the budget, is the recurrent and capital expenditure. So, classification of recurrent and capital expenditure. Broadly speaking, expenditure generally, whether recurrent or capital, in the statistical bulletin of central bank or other statistical reports, they are classified into four basic categories. These are administration, social and community service, economic services, and transfer. So when we're talking about administration, which is the first category, that deals with general administration, defense, that is expenses on armed forces, security for the territorial integrity of the country, then internal security, which has to do with police and other paramilitaries, then the National Assembly. These are generally under administration. They are classified under administration. So we can classify other expenditure as social and community service, such as education, health, and other social and community services. So they all come under the social and community service. Then we have the economic service, which actually carry bulk of the expenditure. This category, they include agriculture, roads and construction, transport and communication, and other economic services. So this constitutes the economic services under expenditure. And lastly, the transfer. Transfer here refers to income paid by government, not for current consumption. For example, public debt services, interest paid on public debt, pensions and gratuities, as well as other contingencies. So these are the broad classification of expenditure: administration, social and community service, economic services, and transfer. So let us focus on the major expenditure powers of the various tiers of government. Which area can each tier of government expend revenue? We'll start with the federal government, which is actually the most powerful, which is the central government in Nigeria. They spend their income on the following areas. One is the defense, because it's the federal government that is responsible for defending the territorial integrity of the country. They are in charge of the military, so all expenditure of the military falls under the federal government. Then external relations, currency and coinage, it's only the federal government that can actually work in that area, that can spend in that area. Banking and insurance, citizenship, immigration, police, prison, and security services. These are internal security. Mines and minerals in Nigeria. Aviation, railway, federal trunk roads, shipping, interstate water resources. These are also areas federal government spend. Post and telecommunication, university and professional education. This actually fall under concurrent list with the state government. Then promotion of agricultural research production, federal health policy, scientific and technological research, and national statistics. So these are areas only the federal government can actually operate. So when we get to the time of fiscal federalism, we're going to discover that we have what is called the exclusive legislative list, which is reserved for the federal government to actually spend. But again, we also have what is called concurrent list, where the federal government can actually coexist, they can spend money. But when there is conflict between the state and the federal power supersedes. So these are actually exclusive areas government or the federation can actually spend their money. They have the expenditure power in these areas. No other tier of government can operate in most of these areas. So I haven't discussed the federal government expenditure powers. Now let us look at that of the state government. The expenditure power of the state government is actually contained in the second schedule of the 1999 Constitution. And it clearly states the areas where state government can actually engage in expenditure, such as state public order to maintain law and order within the state, then interstate trade and commerce, development of state policy, there is state agricultural policy, state health policy, regulation of primary education, provision of post-primary education. So you can see here that it is not the state that actually are in charge of maintenance of primary school. Theirs is to regulate. They are not to provide, they are to regulate the primary education. What they actually provide is the post-primary education. Then university and professional education, technology research, state roads, electricity. The state can actually have power to generate electricity and distribute within their states for those areas that are not linked to the national grid. Then judiciary, they are the one in charge of to maintain the state high court and magistrate court. So these are areas. So if you see some of them are the areas are cutting into that of the federal government. That's what we call concurrent list, where both state and federal government can adjudicate. They can actually expend their income. But there are also some of the residual lists, which is only the state that have power to act in that direction. So these are areas as contained in the second schedule of the 1999 Constitution, giving powers to the local government to operate, to spend in this area. Now the local government, their area of expenditure, the grassroots government. The activities of the local government, the area they can actually perform, are well contained in fourth schedule of the 1999 Constitution. The fourth schedule actually gives them 4 broad areas under which they can operate, they can expend, they have their responsibility to carry out their assignment. These include the provision and maintenance of primary, adult, and vocational education. So, provision of the primary school is the right of the local government. They are to provide, they are to maintain. The state can only come and regulate the activities. Then number 2, the development of agriculture and natural resources other than the exploitation of minerals. The exploitation of minerals is the reserve, is the exclusive right of the federal government. So apart from those exploitation of minerals, other natural resources can be developed by the state government for their own use. Then provision and maintenance of health services. So the local government have power to spend money on primary health care for their communities. They are the closest government to the grassroots, and hence they have those healthcare that take care of minor ailments. And when the issue becomes complicated, they cannot be referred to specialized hospitals. So they are the first point of call. The primary healthcare is under the local government administration. Then such other functions as may be conferred on the local government councils by the state houses of assembly from time to time. So the state house of assembly can give functions, and from records, areas they have actually given functions usually include the area of sewage and refuse disposal, maintenance of cemetery, local government, that is local road, Tronsi road, maintenance of home of destitute, maintenance of markets, slaughterhouses, etc. So it is the sole right of the local government to carry out these areas. So when we are apportioning blame on certain aspects of the society, we should know which tier of government is responsible for what we are complaining about. So if we are complaining that our cemeteries are not well maintained, then we don't have to go and start bothering the federal government. Going by the constitutional provision, it is the local government that should be responsible. If we see mad persons in the street and we say, why are mad people in the street? Then we should not go and call the state or the federal government. The arm of government, the tier of government responsible for that is the local government. Even the abattoirs, the slaughterhouses, they are under the jurisdiction of the local government. So it's the local government that are supposed to license, they are supposed to build, they are supposed to maintain slaughterhouses. If it's a government slaughterhouses, the local government are to build and maintain. If it's that of the private, local government are to regulate and even regulate their activities to ensure that they meet up to standard. So far, we have been able to look at the various aspects of public revenue and public expenditure. We have been able to identify the various sources of revenue to the federal, to the state, to the local government, and even to the federal capital territory. And also, we looked at the various areas each of the tier of government can expend the revenue, where they have power over. So we are able to know what revenue is in our the constitution. We know what revenue is, what public expenditure is. We know the various classifications. So by now we should be able to know who is responsible for what in the society. When things are wrong, we should be able to know the chair of government that is supposed to be responsible for that particular act. If the roads are bad, we should be able to know whether it's from A, from B, or from C road, and know which government is responsible. If it's that the streets are not properly named, then we should know that it's the local government that have not done their function. So we are able to expose you to the various aspects of revenue and expenditure as enshrined in the 1999 Constitution. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. So I will leave you with this tutor marked assignment for those that are my students. It's expected that before the next lecture, this assignment should be submitted. So there are two there which I want you to look at critically, and it will help you to refresh your memory on what we have done. So I want to thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your time. Until I come again in the next lecture, I wish you all the very best. Thank you. Goodbye.